So Steve's doing an Ask Me Anything. Ask me anything.
Ask me anything about accessibility.
So where do you start? Where do you start learning about accessibility?
I wouldn't start from here. So you need to time travel back 15 years and start then, because it's almost impossible to start now.
Let's see.
I've got
Okay.
That's a very helpful thing.
I've got somebody saying, test this, Jenny. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to travel back in time 15 years before I start testing. That would be something which would be nice sometimes. No, don't. Why?
You can start with some simple stuff, because ultimately accessibility is about people, but most testers know nothing about sort of human factors and stuff like that. So for beginners, you really need to start with things that are more around code inspection. And learning some of the more technical aspects of accessibility. And then once you understand that, you can start to do things like user testing, understanding all the sort of human-computer interaction stuff. And eventually you get both the technical side and the human factors side, and that's when you really can do some really good work.
So what do you mean by the technical factors around accessibility? Give me some examples.
Technical, so some people use assistive technologies like screen readers, screen magnifiers, voice recognition software.
And when you say some people, you mean people who are using the thing rather than people who are testing the thing?
Yes, your end users. And so those assistive technologies need to be able to hook into the application that you're testing. Mm-hmm. And so there are accessibility APIs that expose things like structure, content, events, and so on. And so some of the tests we do are to ensure that content is marked up properly with semantic structure, that events like key presses, mouse clicks, and so on are correctly conveyed across the accessibility API so that the assistive technologies can inform the user of what's going on.
And you can do that by looking at the code.
And you can do a lot of that by looking at the code.
Right.
And a lot of the time you also need additional tools to help you do that, to do the heavy lifting.
So even some just semantics of heading 1, paragraph, that is accessibility. So if we write our sites with all divs and classes, that's bad.
Yes, that's one of the checkpoints. If you're familiar with web content accessibility guidelines, most companies aim to meet the AA level. There are 38 what they call success criteria. Mm-hmm. Semantic structure is just one of those. And that's things like things that look like a heading should be marked up as a heading. If you have nested headings, they should be nested correctly. An H2 goes under an H1, an H3 under an H2, and so on. Lists should be marked up correctly rather than just having bullet images and other types of relationships. So if you have, particularly with dynamic content, if you have, say, a drop-down menu, you should have markup in there that tells you that the link at the top is associated with the links in the drop-down, and other markup that tells you when the drop-down is open and closed, because all of these events need to be conveyed across the API to assistive technologies.
Does this change the version of HTML that we should look like in the doc type?
Right. Accessibility's been well supported right from the beginning, but newer versions like HTML5 support accessibility features that weren't in older versions. So certainly if you're looking in terms of fixing things, you have to take the doc type into account, because certain fixes won't be supported in certain doc types.
Okay, so the doc type could limit the level of accessibility that you reach.
Yeah, not greatly, but potentially, yes. Now, the latest ARIA standards have been designed to actually allow sort of retro fixing of old HTML versions by, you obviously can't add new tags into old HTML versions, but ARIA brings attributes that can be added to old elements.
So we can just add ARIA attributes onto old elements.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I need to look up Web Content Accessibility Guides, ARIA attributes.
Yeah, ARIA is a colossal specification. It's as big or bigger than the HTML specification. So it's not a little add-on, it is vast.
Is ARIA an acronym?
It is Accessible Rich Internet Applications.
That makes sense. Okay.
And it came about because HTML originally was static, and so all the accessibility features in there assumed that nothing was going to change. It was all just text and images. And then along came JavaScript, which sort of out of the box isn't accessible at all. And so ARIA, one of the reasons ARIA was created was to enable JavaScript content to become accessible. So there's this concept of name, role, and value, that natively every HTML element has a name, a role, and a value. And if you create something in JavaScript, like a carousel or something, then ARIA allows you to convey the name and the role and the value of that custom element, so that screen readers understand it, and other assistive technologies.
So I think Total Validator Pro, tool that I use, has a checkbox to check against accessibility standards that I never tick. What other does the W3C have a web API that I can use? Or?
They don't. There are a number of organisations that have online checking tools. A lot of them only do one page at a time. There are also tools that will spider a site and run all the tests on every page they find. The quality varies dramatically. Cheap ones and free ones tend to be limited. At the top end, you can be paying many, many tens of thousands of pounds for the higher quality tools. The problem is all automated tools are severely limited. So out of the 38 success criteria at AA, the automated tools can only check about a quarter of them. And they can only make an absolutely definitive judgment on even less than that. So, for instance, you have to have a language attribute on your HTML element. A tool can absolutely, with total certainty, tell you if there is one. You also have to have alt attributes for inline images. A tool can tell you if there is one, but it can't tell you if it's appropriate. So there's this sort of scale from total certainty through something that needs to be checked manually through to things the tool does not have a clue about.
And I guess you have to test differently for different types of accessibility. So blindness, it has to be tested for differently than deafness.
Yeah, and the WCAG, as we call it, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that is a set of supposedly pan-disability checkpoints. Now, I have to say it's very strongly biased towards visual impairments, and next it sort of fairly well supports dexterity impairments and sort of physical things, and it doesn't cover cognitive issues at all well. There are various reasons for that. One is it's very easy for people to understand visual impairments. You can close your eyes and imagine what it's like to be blind. We can get simulators for all different colour perception impairments and so on. Also, the visual impairments community have the loudest and best funded lobby groups who make a lot of noise about it. In terms of numbers, there are probably more people with cognitive impairments, but their lobby groups don't do a good job. And it's much harder for us to imagine what it's like to be dyslexic, what it's like to have short-term memory loss, and all the various other types of cognitive impairments.
Couldn't you use some of those people to help you with that testing? Or developing?
Yeah, you can do. We have a sort of a hierarchy of tests. So if we're starting something new, we'll typically do the technical test, the WCAG tests first. And when you're pretty much compliant with those, then we'll move on to a expert review with assistive technologies, where a consultant will use their expertise with screen readers and so on to assess all of the content of the pages. And then when that's okay, then we move on to user testing with people from all the different disability groups. And that finds yet more issues. But you wouldn't want to do that to start with, because all they'll do is find issues you would have found with the technical testing, but it's much harder to diagnose. So we'd always do things in that order.